It was a screen in the top. So it really was a dark from the sense. And brother, it's going to go right.
Yeah, it works. It does. All right. It is time to begin. There's not. No time. Okay, why don't you like point at me, and then I'll be ready to go.
Oh, I guess we're live.
Are we on? We are ready to go?
Yes.
All the people out in the Facebook sphere that are on. So I'm going to see if I can remember how to do this. It's been a while, but it's good to be here. Mark's out this week and then next week. And so he asked me to kind of carry along his theme. And we talked a little bit about, he gave me his lesson plan and kind of penciled in some ideas of some of the things that he kind of gave to me. I don't have a worksheet. I have a really good worksheet that's sitting on my desk in Columbia. So, sorry. I dropped the ball on that one. I did get a PowerPoint together though, so that's pretty cool. We got pictures to look at. But we talked a lot about where he's going with this, the spiritual disciplines, that kind of developing that spirit-filled life, filled with different exercises and things like that that you can do to keep yourself focused throughout the day. It is something that I wish I could say I was passionate about it, but it is something that I'm definitely interested in, and something that I try to be better at and try to mix things up. Growth that he's called for. My military ministry and as it fits into it. So if you'll bear with me tonight, we're going to start down one path, and about the middle, we're going to talk a little bit about the military ministry, and I'm going to bring it back. And so we're going to do a little bit of a bob and weave there, but it's all going to come together as we go through this. He came up with this idea, faith on the front line. There we go with that. But in all of what he's been talking about, it's all about creating that space and creating that time so that we can become closer with God. Right? That's what the disciplines are all about. And so I found this. This is Foster's on about creating sacred spaces. Now, in this article, he calls it empty spaces. But notice this quote here. It says, "The major thing a private retreat accomplishes is to create an open, empty space in our lives. We learn to waste time for God. Slowly, we come to hear God's speech in His wondrous, terrible, loving, all-embracing silence." He goes on to say, "Gently, we press into the Holy of Holies, where we are sifted in the stillness. Painfully, we let go of the vain images of ourself that seem so essential. Joyfully, we loosen our grip on all those projects that appear to be so significant." So as I read that, and we're listening to the words of Richard Foster, he wrote The Spirit of Disciplines. It's kind of like the textbook of spiritual disciplines and things like that. What comes to your mind when you think this? What is he saying? What happens in that space that we create?
Make room for something else.
Making room for something else. Yeah, what else?
I feel like we got to get disconnected. Like we're living in this society, we just
that we have to let go of all that we've got going on because it's just busy, 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 go, 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 go. And so that's it. And I like how this phrase here, painfully, we let go of the vain images of ourselves that seem so essential. There's a lot of what we do that we're putting on this facade. And then he goes on to say, joyfully we loosen our grip on all those projects that appear to be so significant. Because when you think about projects take time, they take effort, and in our lives there's things that we've got on our to-do list, there's things that we think are so important, but at the end of the day, they're not really all that important. They're not as significant as time think they are. Yes, Derek?
Well, with the Holy of Holies, it brings to my mind the tabernacle, which was a place to encounter God. But if we think of us as being temples of the Holy Spirit, we encounter God, we just approach it that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you think of the holiest of holies, that's where you've encountered God. And so he uses the term open, empty spaces in our lives. I'm using the term sacred spaces, and Mark used that a few times in the last couple of weeks, is that we are creating sacred space in the midst of our busyness that Randy was talking about there. So let's talk about encountering God. Now I want to go all the way back to the beginning, the very beginning, there in Genesis, where Adam and Eve had this very interesting relationship with God. Tell me a little bit about it. What do we know about their living arrangements, the way that they interacted with God? What was it like?
Family.
Like family, yes. They very much father figure. What else? I'm struck when I read Genesis and the Genesis account, particularly when they get to, you don't find a whole lot of they went to church. Or they went and they worshiped. Why was that? It was all worship. And so their life was a holy worship. That was a sacred space that they lived in. God was there. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 3, we use that in our faith group. We used to say, command, example, necessary inference. Remember those things that we go to? I think you can make a necessary inference in there that God would walk about in the garden and they would recognize God's presence, right? Because they recognize that God is nearby and they kind of hear him walking and it scares them because they know they have sinned. So we can infer from that is that they had some sort of stronger connection than maybe some of us do at times, because I don't hear God walking about in my life. I'm not saying that he can't do that, but I don't have that sort of personal relationship that Adam and Eve seem to have had, that we can infer there. But what happened to that relationship? Sin came in, and it did what? It separated. It separated them. And so this is what happened. Sin came in, and the sacred space became all messed up. I don't want to say it was no longer sacred because God was still there. God is everywhere. But it became a lot more difficult. What are some things that entered into the world at that time? We say sin, but what else? Death. What else? Pain. What else? These are all good.
Self-consciousness.
These are not good. Sean, what are we saying?
Self-consciousness.
Self-consciousness. What else?
Separation.
Separation. Come on.
Jealousy.
Jealousy.
Guilt.
Guilt. All these things that we were not made for. We weren't created to be these beings of guilt, of anger, of sin, of all those things, the selfishness. We weren't created to be those individuals. And so everything got messed up. And I like this picture because you've got blue skies and rainbows over here. Now, 2 weeks ago, Mark said that, sometimes we've got this image that we're trying to get back to the garden, but it's a new garden, a new Jerusalem. I totally agree with him on that. So I'm going to say, how do we get back to this? I don't necessarily mean the garden, but how do we get back to that sacred space like Adam and Eve had in the garden? Is kind of where I want to lead us to here. But if you notice, we got blue skies and rainbows. We even got the bunny rabbits and things over here lying under the hammock. Everything's going good. But then sin comes in, and it doesn't look too good on that side, does it? Because what comes in is all the stuff that's attached to sin. The greed, the anger, the lust, the passion, all those different things. And you want to talk about something that escalates very quickly, because we only turn the page like once in the Bible, and you got murder. I mean, it's not like we just like, you tell one lie leads to another, and you kind of ease them on that. Like, they go from lying to God to their kids murdering. I mean, it got out of hand really quickly. And so that was the consequences of the sin. And so the fractured relationship between man and God, and it only got worse. Because if you've been in Randy's class, and if you're in Harvey's class back here on Sunday morning, Israel, God's chosen people, they finally said, God, we would rather have what? A king. Which I would say is probably one of the most watershed moments in all of humanity, is where mankind rejects God and says, we want a king rather than you ruling our lives. So think how far the degradation of society had become. Like, how then are you ever going to create a sacred space where you can encounter God and you can be changed and challenged by God when we've messed up humanity so much in that? We know that the only way is through Jesus, through His Son, because of the blood that washes us clean, and because of the Holy Spirit that we have in that.
Question.
Yes.
Can we go back to the previous slide?
Absolutely.
I'm having trouble understanding the nuclear power plants.
So that was just, things are really bad. The nuclear holocaust. Maybe it's a little too soon right now watching the news and things like that. But, yeah, the guys in the parachute and the flaming things coming out. This is just an image of things were good and things have gotten really, really bad. All right, so you got me there. You got that going on there. So, but Jesus is the way. And in John 15, John's got all those great I am statements. John 15, we have, I am the vine. You're the branches. Now, this is a powerful metaphor that I'm going to end up here at the end. We're going to read those John 15 passages at the end. But why is the vine so important to the branches?
Can't have the branches without the vine.
You can't have the branches without the vine. What else?
Gives life.
Gives life, nourishment. And so there's great imagery here of we need to be plugged in and connected to God, or we're never going to flourish and we're never going to grow. And that's what happens in these sacred spaces. That's what happens in these different exercises that Mark's talked about. Next week we're going to talk about some internal work. If you were in my class, feels like it was the other day, but it's probably been about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. The practice of the presence of God, some of the Brother Lawrence stuff. We're going to talk about that as well. But a lot of that internal work that we do, the creating the sacred space to allow God to come in and transform our life so that we can be plugged in. Because that passage, we're going to read it later, says that if we're not plugged in, we're good for nothing, we're cast away, and we're really just good just to be thrown in the fire and burnt up and things like that. So we need to be connected and stay connected to the vine. And so, ask this question again. These are clips from Israel. So the most recent Hamas-Israel war that's going on. So as you look at these, I want you to think about the sights, the smells, the sounds that are going on in events like this. We've seen these on the news. That's obviously some sort of rocket attack or some sort of bombs going off on the left there. Here we've got armored vehicles are going in. There are vehicles where there once were buildings. Those buildings are no longer there. There were probably people in those buildings that are no longer there as well. You've got 2 armored vehicles over here. One is firing one of its artillery shells over here. This one's burned up because it's been hit. I don't know if anybody's ever been near a tank that shoots off. They are unbelievably loud. I mean, shaking your body to the core loud. And you think of several of those going into a town, hundreds of those coming in and then firing off those tanks and things like that. Isn't it an unbelievable, earth-shattering, earth-shaking sound that's going on in these instances right here? Think about the sounds, the chaos that's going on in the midst of all of this. This is a drone footage of flying over inside of a building, likely a place where people were either working or living. Now, I intentionally didn't put any pictures on there of the deceased and things like that. We've seen those on the news. And so we know what's going on inside the battlefield, the war, the front lines, things like that. But how in the midst of all this chaos that man has created, going all the way back to the fall, how then are we ever supposed to create some sort of sacred space? How do we do that? Now, this is where I want us to kind of push pause for a minute. And I'm going to delve into my chaplain ministry a little bit and talk about that. And talk about some ways in which we, and I'll say this is something that I'm thinking a lot about, because this time next year I'm going to be on a deployment. And I'm very likely going to see and hear some of the things that are on some of these slides here, because some of the countries that we're going to be going to. And so this idea of being able to create a sacred space for the soldiers that are serving with me is something that is very important to me. And so I've been talking with my mentors. I actually hope to have one of my fellow chaplains who has been deployed several times to be here with me tonight, but he just lives so far away he couldn't get here. So let's talk just a little bit about a chaplain's role. We can talk things about nurture the living, care for the wounded, and honor the fallen. Those are some core competencies that I need to be able to do. But really what a chaplain does on the battlefield is he brings soldiers to God, and he brings God to the soldiers. But I'm with them, I walk with them, I talk with them, I eat with them. If I was in an airborne unit, I would jump with them. I go where they go, I'm dressed just like they are. The only thing is I don't carry a weapon. But I'm right there beside them in the midst of all of the chaos. And oh, by the way, I'm supposed to be the one that keeps his head on straight when all of that's happening. You know, I'm supposed to be the one that doesn't freak out by the sights, the smells, the chaos, and the things like that. And so once again, you think about, how do you create sacred space? So, having looked at those pictures, what are some barriers you would think on the front lines there would be to creating sacred space?
Just the emotional devastation.
Emotional, absolutely. Emotional is huge. Like, how do you deal with the emotions that are going on? What else?
Enemy fire.
What'd you say?
Enemy fire.
Enemy fire, obviously. You know, you don't get to say, stop for a minute, we need to have a prayer, quit shooting at us. You can't do that. You can't say, well, we're going to have, it's Wednesday night, we need to stop fighting so we can have midweek Bible study. We can't do that. So enemy fire, what else?
IEDs.
IEDs. All those sort of technical dangers and things like that. I heard something over here. Fear. Fear's a big one. You're just scared. Like you don't know what's going to happen next. Particularly if you know, I'm going to go back just to some of these pictures. You know, could you imagine seeing some of these things happening? I mean, it's right out there. And you see these bombs and you wonder, you hear it coming in. I've been out on the ranges where they're shooting mortar rounds and you hear where they're going. And I can't imagine hearing one coming in and just not knowing where it was going to hit. The fear that's attached to that. What else? What are some other challenges to creating sacred space?
Chaos.
Just the chaos. And so what happens in chaos?
No order, no confusion.
Confusion. So just think about that. Think about in the midst of all of that. I'm going to bring this home because there's application to all of us in there as we do this. But we have to be intentional. So when I think about my role and I think about how am I going to bring God to these soldiers, and how I bring these soldiers to God in the midst of war, in the midst of all the different things that we've talked about, the fears, the danger, all those different things are there. What it comes down to, and what we've actually talked about in this class already, when we're talking about creating sacred space in our lives, is we have to be intentional with the time, with the resources, with everything that God has given us. You know, I was having a conversation with Carter. He started playing lacrosse this year. And so he's really kind of dove into that and is really enjoying that. And so they had their fall ball, and now they're doing winter conditioning. And so we had to take him over to the high school there about 6 o'clock, and he worked out for about an hour and a half. And then we went and picked him up. I was like, how'd the workout go? He said, really good. And he's telling me how he wants to bulk up and wants to get big and strong and things like that. And I told him, I was like, you can come train with me in the morning time. And he said, he goes, you just start too early. I said, yeah. I was like, so there, he said, I can't do it. I was like, you could do that, but you would have to do something else. You'd have to get up early, which means you'd have to go to bed early. Now, if you really want to bulk up and you really want to get stronger, you'll do that. And I wasn't doing it to guilt him. I was using it as an opportunity to a lesson to say, look, we all can say, look, well, I don't have, and the biggest thing is time. I don't have time for that. We have to be intentional with our time. We have to be intentional with the resources, with the space that we're given and things like that. And so in my mind, and I've got a little book that I write things in, and I'm thinking about things, and I'm reading memoirs of guys, and I'm corresponding with a gentleman that have been over to some of the areas that we're going to be going to next year, and I'm asking them, how do you do this? How do you create this sacred space? How do you do those things? And what I find is, like, you yourself have to be connected with God. So be that branch and that vine, connected to the vine. But you have to be intentional about all the opportunities that you have. And so you got to be intentional with your space, the space that you have, the time that you have, the resources that you have. And I know I hammer on those things a lot. So I'm going to share some pictures with you here. And these are some, I guess, chapel services, opportunities that I have ministered in my short time. None of them are exciting as like a battlefield or anything like that. But I have to be very intentional about the spaces. I've been a chaplain for a little over 3 years now. I've never seen a chapel before. I've never been where there's a chapel. You guys got a chapel on your base, don't you? Even the Air Force, they got everything, That's air conditioning. No, but I've never had a chapel. So a lot of times we're creating our own. And so this was actually on the left-hand side. This is in Camp Shelby, Mississippi. This is where we would eat. And so I'm like, I just got to use an opportunity, use everything that I have. This was at Fort Campbell. This is a pop-up tent that we use as a TOC. It's a tactical operations center. And so there's lots of computers and things in there. I woke up really early one morning before they start turning on the computers and doing their battle drills and stuff like that. And I said, most of it because there was heat in there. And I wanted to go in there and I stand outside. I said, hey, let's have a little chapel right there. I've got to work my time into their time because as the training schedule's going, they will give me time, but it has to fit within their time frame. I can't say, sir, Colonel, you're preparing for this deployment, and I know all your guys have to do all these, check all these boxes, but I'd like to have about an hour, 15 minutes, and I'd like to get with the praise team, and I'd like to get with the worship leader, and I'd like to get with the worship team. I'd like to have James and Steve to help me run the PowerPoints and things like that. It's just me and my sergeant. And so we got to come in and we've got to create in the midst of where all their flipboards are and things like that, or where they're getting ready for chow, and create a sacred space for these soldiers. This here is in a couple different armories. There's just a classroom that we got, circle up some chairs. Create a space where you can talk and you can get soldiers to begin opening up about struggles that they're having, fears that they're having. And actually this one right over here is just, I walked into this is at another armory. I want to say it's in Jamestown. But I walked in, and this actually, it was not an intended chapel service, but I was having a conversation with this second guy over that's leaning up. He was talking about some fears that he was having about the upcoming deployment, and so we were talking, and then more people came in, and more people came in, and more people came in, and before you know it, we had a group there, and I just started saying, well, let's have our chapel right now. And so we opened up the door and let some people come in. You got to use those opportunities as they come your way. That right over there is the most G.I. Joe picture I have of myself. Pretty hardcore right there. This was out in Fort Hood, Texas, now Fort Cavazos. We're in the middle of nowhere. It was so hot that day. And this was this past summer down in Camp Shelby again. Using those opportunities. A lot of times I don't have a podium to take with me. I'll just on the front of a Humvee or something like that. I've stood on the top of M1 Abrams tanks. I've stood on the back of Bradley fighting vehicles that come down. I've stood just out in the middle of a field. Just any opportunity to kind of create a space where the soldiers can go, okay, I can detach from the exercises and things that are going on right now, and I can go and I can be with God. And I can grow, and I can mature, and I can get spiritually fed and all of that. This is a battle staff meeting. In the middle of it, the commander wanted me to say a prayer, but they gave me an opportunity, so I took 2 to 3 minutes and tried to encourage them and staying focused on our goals, because there was a lot of accents that were beginning to happen, and so I said we all need to, and so use the opportunity to try to encourage the key leaders that were there, because it's not just the soldiers, it's the leaders that need it as well. And then this one right here is another one that was in Fort Hood, just out in the middle these guys were serving food. They're some of the hardest workers, those maintainers. They work on the vehicles, they serve the food, they maintain the porta potties and things like that if we have them. And so I was just over there getting some MREs, a box of MREs, and they said, "Sir, can you pray with us for a little bit?" I said, "Well, sure, yeah, I can." And so, like I said, I've never really had a chapel that I can preach in, and a lot of times I really quickly learned that the soldiers go where the food is, and so I would go to wherever the food was being served, and I would help serve food, and as the soldiers, as they got their food, I would say, "Hey, I'm going to be right over here, and I'm going to pray, and I've got a little devotion if you guys want to come over." And it never felt like one person will come over, kind of slowly come over, and then everybody sees, "Oh, well, there's one person over there, well, I'll go over." And next thing you know, you've got 4 or 5, 10, 15, whatever, just right over there, and that you can spend some time with. And then once they're done, you pack up and you go to the next. It's very much like, I feel like Paul on his missionary journeys kind of going around and doing things like that. So a lot of things I do is I say, I've got to do a lot of preparation of myself, and so there's things that I do, there's things that I carry, there's things that I equip myself with that I don't usually do, or I did when I worked here. And one thing is a flag here. This is a chaplain's flag. And so in the back of my Humvee, I would keep some of this netting that you see back here to your top left, that camo netting. I could go to a tree line, I could put that up, there's some poles that go in, and then I would always hang my chaplain flag that always goes with us outside of it. Because you're in your field, and I'm at a battalion level, and so you got 1,000 soldiers there, and they want to know where the chaplain is. And you can say, well, he's about 50 yards down to the right, you can see the flag. So right there by the flag. And I can take that camo netting, I can break it down really quickly. We can go drive around to the next area of operation, wherever the next unit in our battalion is, and we can set that up again really quickly, plant the flag down and say, that's where the chaplain is. And what I found is, while it's just the tail end of a Humvee with some camo net overing, the minute that you put that chaplain flag down, it kind of creates a space where they know what's going to happen there. They know that I'm going to pray with them. They know that we're going to sing some songs. They know that in one of my little pouches, I've got communion for them if they want to take communion. And they know that we're going to just have that time where they're going to be able to detach from what's going on in the training day, whatever their struggles are, and they can encounter God. So do those different things like that. So I always keep in my back a couple boxes of MREs, one just because they're oh so delicious to eat. You ever had one? No, they're not. But I keep those back there because that's probably my sergeant, Sergeant Holt, who works with me. He's my right-hand man. He can do anything with boxes of MREs. And so I'm like, Holt, I need a podium. Stack them up, put a little cloth over them. I got a little podium I can preach from. Believe it or not, and this is not us, but notice over there they took MREs, put plastic in it, filled it up with water, and now they have a baptistry. Pretty cool. Notice over here you get a bunch of engineers together. You can do just about everything. That's a front end loader that an engineer group did, and they just put some lining in that, and next thing you know, you've got a baptistry out there. So you got to think out of the box sometimes, but creating those spaces where, hey, you were talking about becoming a child of God today. You were talking about baptism. I'd like to do that. When we were down in Fort Hood, that picture where I was standing out in the middle of the field, there was a soldier that got baptized one of the weeks that we were there. If you've ever know anything about Fort Hood, there's just so much land out there. They found a river that ran through it, and they took him down in the river and they baptized him. I got to see it. I wasn't the one who did it. He wasn't one of my direct soldiers, but he's part of our regiment that we were in. So these sort of things that can happen here on Sunday morning happens in the military as well. But it's all about creating that sacred space in the midst of everything that we've got going on. So I do things like I carry boxes. I carry a box of Bibles, and like I said, I brought this just kind of a little bit of a show and tell. This I usually have on my plate carrier bulletproof vest thing because my mom really likes hearing about my bulletproof vest. I'm sure she doesn't like hearing about it. But I call this my office in a pouch. I carry in, this is a little prayer book. It's also got some hymns in it. And so I've got this. It's dog-eared and well-worn. I've got a little pocket Bible in here that I use as well. And this is a book that I have that's already got pre-made great sermons in it. It's got memorial services. It's got rank ceremonies. It's got funeral services. It's got a lot of stuff in it. So I'm creating and putting stuff in here so that I've got tools and things that I need when we deploy next year. So, because I'm not going to have a computer that I can go to and things like that I can sit down in like an office that I had here. And so it's very much you're thinking on the fly. You're doing things as the situation dictates. Another thing that I've done recently, and I didn't have one with me because it's in my locker at the armory. I know within the churches of Christ, we're not real big on like liturgical garb. Like we're not wearing like robes and stuff like that. Mark doesn't get up in like his robe, or we've never done that. But when you're out in a field with 1,000 other soldiers and you look just like them, you've got the same vest and helmet with your night vision goggles on them, and maybe you got mud on your face because you guys have been out in the field for so long. You look just like them. There's something about, and I usually keep it in my pouch as well, and unroll it. It's just a purple stole that I'll put on. There's nothing holy about it. It doesn't do anything that makes me more important than anyone else. But what it does is when the soldiers see that, they're like, okay, chaplain's about to do something. And what it does is it begins to redirect their minds. It's that intentionality of going, okay, well, if he's over there and he's getting out his chaplain stuff, he's going to start a chapel right out in the middle. Or he's going to have prayer, or he's going to have some counseling time with someone or something like that. And so I started doing that. I'm not, I don't do it all the time because I'm not used to wearing that, but I found that it's very effective. When I put it on, everybody's like, oh, chaplain's here. He's ready to do his thing. And it's just something as simple as just a little purple stole that I put on. Like we come here to church and we're like, oh, we know where Mark is. We know where the elders are. We know where they go during the invitation. We know we can go here. We know we can go talk with them. But there's something about creating that moment for the soldiers to come in and talk with me. So before we transition back into us, I've talked here for probably the last 35 minutes. Questions, comments? When we talk about creating spaces and overcoming those challenges.
Sometimes you have to create the space in your own mind.
That's what we're transitioning to. You're absolutely right. So I know what you're thinking. Those are cool stories. The pictures look cool. But I'm not in the military, so what about me? So what about me when I'm doing all this? Well, what are some of the challenges that we face today? What are the barriers to us today, November the 29th, 2023, Brentwood, Noblesville, Nashville, Tennessee, wherever you live, what are the challenges that are keeping us from creating a sacred space?
You have to decide you're going to do it.
Okay? Maybe we just haven't made the decision yet. What else? Work, absolutely.
The codes department.
Codes, maybe, yeah. What else?
Distraction.
What kind of distractions, Steve?
Everything. A flood of information.
Flood of information, absolutely. One thing Jocelyn and the boys and I like to do this time is watch Christmas movies. And the other night we were watching one, and it was all four of us there, which was odd. Sam's got his girlfriend or whatever. And at one point I got up to go get something, and I looked around, and we were watching this big screen, but we all had a little screen in front of us. And I thought to myself, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? It's distractions, the flood of information. What are other things that keep us from creating that sacred space?
Well, both I want to say it and I want to ask you too. There's
Okay.
also those that are just not interested.
Okay.
Those that are just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Whether it's apathy or agnostic or whatever. And I don't know if you face that yet, or if people are actually out having a battle.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to get some people not appreciating you.
Good. So if you hear Greg, is it just the apathy of people going, I just don't even feel like I need this to have sacred space in my life? Maybe it's not atheism, maybe it's agnosticism, maybe it's just they just really don't care. I just don't care about that right now. I'm focused on work, I'm focused on the distraction, I'm focused on other things. And then he asked me, have I faced that sort of apathy? Very rarely have I ever had someone say, no, you can't pray for me. I've invited people to come to chapel services and things like that I'm doing. And, as you can see, it's not a large crowd. I think the most I've ever had at one time is 30. But a lot of times I'm going to multiple places in one day, so that's 15 here, 5 here, 10 there. So it's a pretty good number after that. When you think I'm a battalion chaplain of 1,000 soldiers, there is a lot of apathy in that. The only war that I've been is in simulated battles in Fort Hood. And in the midst of all that, when you've got guys that are up 24/7 sleeping and they're always doing something, they're not sleeping under ideal conditions, you're getting word back from home that dad's sick. And when we were down in Fort Hood, Texas, I had to do 4 death notifications for soldiers, which is crazy. I thought, 4 really? And they said, it's usually more than that, of just a family member passing away or something. So you've got those emotional stresses that are on there. So what my experience has been, and a lot of there's no atheist in foxhole sort of my mentality right there, is my soldiers have been very receptive to interactions with me. Would I wish they would all be a lot more? Absolutely. It's kind of like working here. Like you wish everyone else would be as excited about being in church and being involved as you are, and things like that, as we individually are, and things like that. But I haven't had to battle that yet, but we'll see in this next year how that plays out. Any other barriers or distractions we have to creating this sacred space? Look at this picture here.
Little device we hold in our
Which
hand.
side?
The device we hold in our hand.
Device we hold in our hand, absolutely. There's more of those distractions and things like that. Are there broken relationships? Yeah. And I know that picture is maybe a husband and a wife, but it could be brother, sister. It could be brother, brother. It could just be broken relationships that create a barrier between us and having that sacred space. Sickness? Is there sickness today? Yeah. Struggling, known illnesses, unknown illnesses. Prognosis is that we're not sure of. Treatments that we've heard about, but we're not sure. Treatments that don't really look like they're working and things like that. There's sickness. This right here is like the economy's going down. Anybody thinking about that? There's very real struggles today in some homes to make ends meet. And then this gentleman up here is, there's a lot of anxiety, depression today. I probably had more conversations in the last 3 years with soldiers that are experiencing suicidal ideations and thoughts and anxiety and depression than I ever have in my whole ministry. 20 years plus. Anxiety, depression, things like that. But that's not it. That's happening around us. I think these 4 things are probably happening maybe in this room right now. So these are all distractions that we have, all things that are keeping us. These are the challenges. And so the big question then is how do we create the sacred space when we've got our own chaos? There's not buildings falling down. No one's shooting at us because we're not living in Memphis. But there's we like these in Memphis. But we're not in a battlefield. There's people not like that sound and chaos and smells and things like that are not happening around us, but there's still challenges to us being able to enter into the presence of God. So how do we do it? Issues are the same, the battlefield is different. You've got to be intentional again. If you've not already begun thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow to better yourself with God, you're already at a deficit. Militarily speaking, if we don't go ahead and plan for what the enemy is going to do tomorrow, you better believe the enemy's already thought about it. That's where I like the National Guard motto, be ready because you don't always have time to get ready. I like that because that'll preach too. But if you don't think that the enemy, Satan, has not already thought about how he's going to trip you up tomorrow, sadly mistaken. Sadly mistaken. Let's read here John 15. Referenced this earlier. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Pause here for just a minute. I've read this I don't know how many times. I've taken John graduate courses. I have preached. I have taught this. But this verse 2 here, he cuts every branch in me. I never picked up on that. He cuts every branch in me that bears no fruit. Think about that. Think of that imagery of being cut out of Jesus. Being cut away from him. And the pain that it could be causing him in that. I know vines are kind of inanimate. We don't think about vines having and branches having emotions like that, but that just struck me as I've been reading this the last couple of days. So he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Here it is. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. That's powerful. Let me read that again. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. If we think we can do this on our own, and I have to say this to soldiers because we develop that infantry mentality, I can do it. You know, you're missing a leg. I can keep going, keep soldiering on, things like that. We can't always just soldier on. You know, we can't do it by ourselves. We must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. See how he's repeating himself? This is like my mom lecturing me. My mom would get to a point and she'd repeat it again and she'd repeat it again. Like Jesus is trying to say something here. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done to you. This is my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. We've talked about being connected to the vine here. What are things that we can do? We can pray. We can read our Bible. There's hymns that we can think about. We live in a time now where these things that we carry can be an absolute distraction or they can be an absolute blessing. We have a lot of information given to us. There's devotionals, there's Bible studies, there's things that we can do. I was talking with Mark recently about how life is different. So Monday through Friday, I'm working for a not-for-profit down in Columbia, and I'm not surrounded by my church folks like I was when I was here. They didn't have to go out my doors right next to me, you know. And I don't have the people encouraging me like I had in this hallway here. So I have to be very intentional. And this isn't to pat myself on the back, but what I have to do is I have to set an alarm on my phone about every 2 hours. Just as a reminder. And I take 30 seconds to 3 minutes to just stop. And it's pray. It's listen to a very short podcast, a very quick devotional, something. Because if I don't, I'm lost. I'm not plugged into the vine. I'm not plugged into the vine, and I'm not getting that nourishment that I think that I am. And so I have to be intentional about that. As I said before, if you're not already planning for tomorrow, you need to be, because the enemy is. If you don't make sure that you are connected, Satan will make sure that you are not connected. And so we just read the text there. Any questions, comments, observations as I went through that text about being connected to the vine?
Yeah, so that one slide that you showed about things that can keep us away from sacred spaces, you know, like the hardship, the troubles, the pain and suffering and all. So I'm thinking about David, right? I'm thinking like a guy who was accustomed to battle and war and hardships, right? And I think so part of his sacred space was like taking his pain and suffering to God. Right? So that was part of his sacred space. And it can be part of ours. And the other thing I'm thinking about is our time with each other. How that can be sacred space and like kind of direct us back to God.
Yeah. So you make a very good point there, and I kind of glossed over this, or I didn't hit on it as well. These can all be motivators also, right? When you're in a broken relationship, when you're struggling with anxiety, depression, when there is sickness, when you are financially, struggling, that can be a time for you to seek out that sacred space. That's usually not the case, but it can be. And then also, Adam talked about the camaraderie, the brotherhood, to use the military language there, of the fellow Christians. That's something that you draw near on so that you can share in their sacred space or create sacred space with them. And I think that's something that's special that happens. And like that conversation I had in that office where I'm talking with one service member and next thing you know, 2's in there and 3's in there and I've got 10 in there. Because what happens is, you're like, well, no, we're all struggling with this fear of what's going to happen next year. We're all struggling with this. Well, let's talk about it. Let's use this opportunity. Man, what if we're more open and honest with one another? I know we talk about that a lot, and that's something that we need to kind of think about is that open honesty that we can have with one another. Like, I'm scared for my family. You know? Jocelyn and I've got a young man who's on his way of being a man. We're kind of scared about the future. You know, what's it going to be like for him? You know, he's dating a girl that looks like it could potentially be the one or whatever. Like, well, how's that going to play out? What's going to, there are real fears and things that we have about that. Like, what if they make this decision? What happens? Or what if they do this? Or what if they want to do this? Or what? Those are real fears that we all have in our lives. You know? Mom's sick. Dad's sick. Caring for mom and dad. All these different things that are going on in our lives can be things that can really shake us to our core. Any other thought? Yes, Ed?
Another way, look at verse 2.
Yes.
And we're looking at, I was thinking that, you know, we deadwood trees and things, get rid of that. And if you look at it too, it's saying that deadwood are our past sins.
Mm-hmm.
And our sin, if we're in sin, we can't bear fruit. And so Jesus can cut out that sin. And he can, you know, he forgives those sins and he cuts that part out. So that we're able to bear fruit, more fruit on the branches that we have. So there's another little different way to look at that. Jesus helps deadwood us.
Mm-hmm.
Through
Oh,
forgiveness.
how did you say that? Say that again? He helps us.
Deadwood us.
Deadwood us. I like that. Yeah, because one thing that we didn't really hit on is like our purpose, the branch's purpose is to bear fruit. Because then what happens is it grows and produces more, and the multiplication, and that's the whole Great Commission right there. So what are some things that we can do? You know, I hate to kind of reiterate is that be intentional with our time, with the things that we're doing. I don't have to tell you that prayer is important. We know that. I don't have to tell you that Bible study is important. We know that. But those are the answers, really. It's like the only way that we're going to get close to God is by getting close to God. The only way that I got to know Jocelyn is I got to know Jocelyn by dating her. You know? And so we got to spend time with God. It's the only way that we're going to get close to Him. It's the only way that we're going to stay plugged into the vine. Because it's definitely important for us. So, as we draw things to a conclusion here, any questions or comments? Observations? So next week what I want us to do is we're going to kind of go a little bit further into this getting connected, and we're going to talk about some inward practices on things that we can do. I may have an exercise or two that we can go in as we're doing this. I'll try to make sure that I have my handout with me next week so we can get back into that. I will challenge us as we look at the remainder, the next few days as we see one another again on Sunday. What are some things that we can do to stay connected to one another, stay connected to God? And then as we look, as we're planning our week next week, how do we ensure that Monday through Friday, that we stay connected to God in that? And I'll say this as well. As much as I try to make sure that I stay connected to God, I mean, I'm unplugging that all the time. And it's not intentional, it just happens. Or maybe it is intentional, and I'm just making excuses for it. But it happens. When we talk about staying plugged in, it just, throughout the day, that's why I have to remind myself all the time. And the funny thing that's happened about the alarm going off is I'm in a cubicle kind of way back in the back, kind of by myself, and like, so that alarm goes off. And so my employees started going, why you got all these alarms? Like, you taking medicine? I mean what's going on here? And I was like, oh, it's just nothing. I know something. And they finally kept pushing. I was like, well, you want to know? I was like, yeah. I was like, I got to remind myself to pray. And like, oh, okay. And so that has kind of opened up some conversations with some of them of like, oh, well, I'm studying this. Or one of my employees, she goes, I'm looking for a study Bible. What do you suggest? I was like, oh, here's one. And so she went, so she's reading that and she's excited about some of the things. And so who knows, some of our efforts in trying to discipline ourselves can open the door to conversations with other people as well. So we're going to be done here just about 5-10 minutes early, so let's end in prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Almighty God, Lord, we love you, we thank you, we need your grace and mercy in our lives every single day. And Lord, as we think about the battlefield front lines that are in our lives, where we know that it's easy to look and see chaos in the world, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Russia and Ukraine, tempers that are boiling up in other places in the world. But we know that there are battles that are going on in the United States. There's battles that are going on in our state. There's battles that are going on in our homes. Lord, there's probably even battles going on in this church right now, Lord. But we pray, as you challenged us in John 15, that we need to stay plugged into you, that you are the vine, that you help us bear fruit. And Lord, we're challenged by the fact that when we're not doing the things that we should, that you will deadwood us, that you can deadwood us, that you can bring us back when we repent. But then also we realize that when we've given up to not getting better, that you will cut us off. And Lord, we don't want to be that way. But Lord, we pray that you do rejuvenate us. But I pray that as we look at our lives each and every day, that we find those moments that we can draw near to you, because we know that you'll draw near to us. But we look for those moments that we can just push pause on the busyness of our days, the distractions, the noises, the information, the sounds, the beeps, the buzzes, and that we can just stop and we can just be with you for just a moment. And Lord, may we relish those moments and look forward to those moments in our lives, and may we use those to transform us each and every day. Lord, I pray for the families that are here right now. I pray for those that want to be here but can't. Lord, we need you. We love you.